So to do that, I have put some duct tape on top of a socket extension. Macgyver, please be with me. Okay. Well, hello, and welcome to Lap of the World. I'm Richard. Now, normally on this channel, we are all about road trips and racetracks. But today kind of falls under the category of things that I must do first before I can do that. So here we are, elbows deep in a 2004 Lamborghini Gallardo. And I'm trying to see how hosed I am. Some pun intended, I'll just own that one. What I'm doing is I'm using right now a little bore scope here to find the other end of a coolant hose that I need to replace because it has become unsustainably brittle by virtue of just age and heat cycling at this point in time. In fact, once I get around to actually telling the story of how I ended up with this car, it was the source of some drama in my collection process. But today we're looking to address that because it's really the last impediment to me really feeling like I can use this car enthusiastically or drive it long distances without worrying too much. Unfortunately, as with most things, it can't be easy. Now, for those that know me, my first car was a 1991 Toyota MR2 Turbo, and any of you familiar with the SW20 chassis are most likely also familiar with the hose from hell. Now, that coolant bypass line is legendary for the difficulty in getting to it, in that with the MR2, step one is almost remove the engine just to get to this one rubber hose. Now, I don't think this is on that level, but I do think it's going to take some finesse and sort of an out-of-the-box approach to get to it without having to take a whole bunch of stuff off the car, like the entire intake manifold, which is something I'd rather not do, frankly. Not until it's necessary or for some other fun purpose anyhow. So, what I've been doing, as I said, is I'm using this little bore scope to find the other end of it. Now, the outer end attaches to the coolant expansion tank, which is right here and very easy to get to. The other end, unfortunately, is sandwiched directly between the firewall and the engine block and sort of this coolant hub, I guess I would call it. There's sort of an aluminum fixture there into which and out of which a lot of the different coolant routes flow through the car. Fortunately, unlike an MR2 or even an NSX for that matter, this car has a lot of aluminum pipes and fittings with the occasional rubber coupler rather than a bunch of long or large diameter rubber hoses of any kind, which have a propensity, at least in the NSX, to just explode after they get, to be 10 to 15 years old and have been heat cycled enough. So, that is why you find me with what looks like a semi-surgical mise-en-place out here, because I'm going to use, my strategy right now is to use my little hemostats here to kind of do the automotive equivalent of what they would do in a normal surgery. And for the record, I'm not a doctor or a surgeon, but I read enough and watch enough TV, I guess. So normally you'd use these to clamp off a vein to control bleeding. Well, I'm going to try and use these to clamp off the outer side of the coolant hose. So when I disconnect the middle part where we spliced it to get home, it's not going to puke all over the floor. Or at least it'll control the amount that's going to puke on the floor until I can get the whole thing replaced. So I'm going to use this to control the leakage. And then I'm going to attempt to get, I think the strategy I've got going right now is, if I look down behind where these two lobes of the intake manifold are, if I look straight down there, I can see the top of a banjo fitting, which is the other end of this coolant hose. Now, if I can undo the banjo fitting and extract the hose out this direction, then with the fitting out here, I can change the hose over and do whatever I need to do. And I'm probably going to put some additional heat shielding on it before I reinstall it. And then you have the fun of trying to thread it back in there, get it over the fitting, if there are any washers, reapply those and get the thing tightened back down sufficiently to avoid any future leaks, because it's kind of one of those pieces of automotive trivia that seems counterintuitive, but automotive coolant is actually flammable under certain circumstances. So you really want to limit or eliminate the any leakage that could end up near or around components that get really hot, like the headers, which are directly below where this line runs. So, in the further interest of avoiding an Italian barbecue, we're going to get to work here. So the next thing you're going to see is probably going to be some compilation of narrative, bleep, swearing, maybe some bleeding, and hopefully eventually a resolution that involves a contiguous and intact coolant hose being run from the expansion tank to the valve block or the distribution block that's on the back of or front of the engine there. Wish me luck. The hose we're dealing with is the middle hose back there that you can see the two hose clamps applied to. Now that is where we applied a splice in order to sort of facilitate getting the car home. And thus far, to the previous owner's credit, who actually did the work on that, it seems to have, held its water. So, but rather than just leave it alone and risk the sort of upstream side of the hose down here, which is old, from exploding, we're going to need to replace the entire line. Now, the reason that's a problem, as I kind of indicated in our introduction there, is where the other end of it lies. The other end of it is about 6 inches below the pit of despair up here between the the front ends of the two lobes of the intake manifolds, which is really unfortunate because you can't really get to that. So you have no real room to work over here. It's just very tight and crowded with other stuff. And then there's not a lot of room to work behind there. Fortunately, I'll show you what I'm looking at when you look straight down that hole if we flip over to the screen of the laptop here. So hopefully that's showing up, but that is the top of a banjo fitting if I look at the parts diagram correctly. So I should be able to undo that screw and then remove the line from the top. And if I can get it off from the top, then I don't have to undo the hose clamp that's right there, which would be nearly impossible to get to with any kind of tool. And then I should be able to pull the end of the coolant hose out from right here. Alright, so phase one seems to have been somewhat a success. I've not generated a spout of antifreeze at this point, so alright, so on to phase two. I now have the laptop and borescope back in place, and I've got that thing sort of balanced where I can see the top of the banjo fitting that I'm trying to get to. And now it's just an issue to see if I can get a socket on that without disturbing the camera that's showing me if I'm getting a socket on it or not. Alright, so we now have the old hose off, and that's probably, unfortunately, it's probably the easy part. There was like an intermediate kind of, I don't know what you call that, like a retaining bracket, but that's why I had to go and reach in with the hemostats and pull the hose out the other end to slide it out from that clip. Right, so I just literally pulled this in half. So as much as a pain in the butt as changing this out is going to be, I think that kind of illustrates why it's a good idea. And in fact, if you have a Gallardo, this is one of those things that, although this one mine has 64,000 or 65,000 miles on it right now, but I don't think the mileage is the issue here. I think it is purely the age of the rubber. So if you've got an early year Gallardo of any year, this is probably an item, or probably a number of items you should really be going through and replacing the heater and the heater hoses and coolant hoses. The few that there are. So I was able to get even like the fancy molded ones with a braided covering on them from essentially a Lamborghini dealership, again through Bull Stuff, for a couple $100 for the entire kit. That's super cheap insurance versus blowing a coolant hose out somewhere in the middle of nowhere. That's my PSA for the day, but I'm going to finish disassembling the fitting here, and we'll see if we can how we can go about getting it back on the car with a new hose and maybe a little bit better heat shielding. So having removed the banjo fitting, I now need to remove one of the crush washers that's on top of the banjo fitting. So to do that, I have put some duct tape on top of the socket extension. Macgyver, please be with me. Oh yeah. I didn't know if that was actually going to work, but I'm glad it did. So now I have a reference to see if I can match this crush washer, because I didn't pre-order these because I'm a dummy. So I can at least have a snowball's chance of finding something at a parts store before I have to just order and wait again. So now comes the tricky part of reinstallation. So I have my new, significantly more flexible hose now attached to the banjo fitting and crimped on with the original hose clamp. So again, trying to channel my Richard Dean Anderson here, I'm going to first put on one of the crush washers onto the banjo bolt, and I'm going to slide the bolt through the fitting. Then I'm going to put the second crush washer on the bottom. Then I'm going to take a plastic like bread bag tie here, wire tie, and I'm going to tie this around the bottom very loosely, just like this, and give it a tail that goes up vertically. Now my hope is, if I can get this twisted around here a little bit more firmly, that this will hold this in place while I snake it in, position it over the hole, and then start the threads in the screw. Once the threads are started, then I'll use the hemostats to grab this and pull it, unwinding this and getting it out of the way of the lower crush washer. So that is the plan of attack. We will see if that plan survives first contact. All right, well, that was a pain. It was touch and go for a minute. We had to make some adjustments. I brought in a coat hanger to use to guide the end of the hose, because since it's not crusty, it just wanted to droop down into the abyss there. And then I had to pull, I had to come back out and more loosely did too good of a job winding on my wire tie here the first time around, and I got it threaded in, but then I couldn't get this to pull off. So I threaded it in the opposite direction, so I wasn't trying to wind up on the screw as I threaded it in, and then went for another go, and we got it. So I don't know that I could write this up as a consummate DIY at this point, or an easy peasy. I'd probably give this one on your mechanical aptitude scale probably a 7 or 8 out of 10, depending on the level of patience you have. But nonetheless, it has been done without actually removing anything from the car. So that alone was probably worth the effort. Now, all I need to do, I did run the bore scope back in there and validated that I did manage to sandwich both of the crush washers. The only thing I'm going to do now before I connect the other end is I'm going to thread this DEI heat shielding down there, and so that it's a little additional protection to hopefully hopefully make sure I don't have to do this again anytime soon. And yeah, then we'll get it buttoned up, and it should be, I might even be able to drive this thing tomorrow. Who knows? But anyhow, that's the video for today. I'll catch you guys in the next one. I'm Richard. This is Lap of the World. Thanks for watching.